Tonight is all about brain health. As I mentioned in some of the promo for this, this was really instigated by one of my practice members who was particularly interested in brain health, both for her and I believe also for a partner or a friend as well. And so she said, "Look, what should I be doing for my brain?" And it was, in the middle of a busy chiropractic shift, and I sort of said, "Well, look, here's a couple of quick tips, but that's a bit of a bigger answer than I can go into right now. What about if I make it into a webinar for you?" And I will certainly share it with her if she's not on board today, so that I can go into a bit more detail. Obviously, I can't necessarily stop for an hour for each of my practice members. That'd be a really slow shift. And So I can't necessarily stop and do that. So this is what these are for. And so it's a great advantage, I guess, for those of you who are practice members of Healthy Choices Chiropractic, but also for those of you who are members of my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group, is that you can, jump in, ask any questions you've got, make any suggestions you want for future lives, and I'm more than happy to try and accommodate that. So look, I can definitely see lots more people coming on board now. So we're going to get into it and start talking about the brain. And so, Stephanie has mentioned how to not end up like my dad. So I know Stephanie has a father who does have some challenges in terms of cognition and brain function, some very serious challenges, some very advanced challenges. And so I'm sure for many of you that will be a similar concern. And there's lots of things that you can do that do make a difference. So that's the good news. So we're going to talk about those. But really, when it comes to what you can do for your brain, at least as far as what we know so far in the research, is that there are kind of really three important things to look at, right? And so that is inflammation, okay? And inflammation is particularly challenging and damaging for the brain in terms of causing the brain to age quicker than it should and to not function as well as it should. And I think that's a really important point, is that so often what I see in society, I see this in my chiropractic practice a lot, in terms of people's spines and nervous systems, but also just in terms of health in general, is that often our idea of aging is very skewed, in that we do live in quite an unhealthy population. I was recording my podcast for This Week in Wellness this week, and it was an update on stats for Australia. And one of the stats was that I think it was just over half of all Australians have at least one chronic lifestyle-related disease, right? And so that's half of all Australians. That's not half of all adults or half of all people over the age of 40 or 50, right? That's half of all Australians, right? So, and so that's obviously a really significant number of people who just aren't healthy and who aren't functioning well, and as a result are probably aging quicker than they should be. Certainly the research would indicate that their brains, if they do have those chronic diseases, are probably aging quicker than they should be. And so what we want to talk about is healthy aging, okay, and healthy brain aging and healthy brain function, as opposed to what many people will think of as quote unquote normal aging. All right, so I want to differentiate between what's common, which is accelerated aging of both the body and the brain, and what's normal, which is for that to be a much slower, healthier process, more akin to what we might see in the blue zones around the world. I think those are little windows into what's possible. And I also think they're actually windows into what's normal, before we sort of corrupted our lifestyles, of how our brains would age in a healthy way. I remember reading about a particular society, and I can't remember where they were off the top of my head, but there was a particular society, a tribal society, where you had to be 100 years old in order to be in the council of elders who ran the society. And I just remember thinking, what an incredible thing to have, A, enough people who live to 100 to be able to do that, but B, enough people who live to 100 with enough physical and mental capability to actually run the society, to be switched on enough to be able to do that. And so I think, if we can start shifting the way we think about the function of our brain and normal aging of our brain, then that would be a really good start. And I think that then opens up the possibilities of what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of what we can do to look after our brain. So when it comes to our brain, as I said 5 minutes ago, I started saying this and I'm going to finish it now. There are really three things in the research that are really shown to affect our brain function. Right? One is inflammation, okay? And so there's lots of stuff we can talk about in terms of minimizing inflammation in your body and therefore minimizing inflammation in your brain. Circulation, okay, so we know that blood flow to our brain is vitally important, and when that's not functioning well, then that can have a real impact in terms of nutrients into your brain, waste out of your brain, oxygenation of your brain, all of those sort of things. And then the third one is stimulation. All right, so we're going to be talking about each of those as we go through tonight. Inflammation, circulation, and stimulation. And it's really important that we're looking at it from all three angles. And I think it's really important that we also understand that that's what we know so far. The brain is amazing, complex. We're learning more about it all the time. We're learning more about neurology all the time. It's likely that there are lots of other factors that we can be mindful of in terms of keeping our brain really healthy, and that healthy lifestyles are going to help to do that, but we just don't know yet. All right. So whilst we can sometimes get a bit reductionistic and think, well, this is what the research says helps now, so that's all I'm going to focus on. I think an overall healthy lifestyle is what's going to really contribute towards an overall healthy brain as well. So that's just sort of my little caveat at the start. But in terms of inflammation, circulation, stimulation, the one thing that's probably best at hitting all three of those categories really is movement. Okay, and so I think when people think about brain health, they tend to think of brain training first. In terms of what I can do to stimulate my brain, to train my brain, to keep it active, to keep it healthy. And then they probably think of diet second, and then they probably think of movement third. And I think that is probably the wrong way around. As much as all three of those are important, maybe they're equally important, I'm not sure. But in terms of what we know so far, it would seem that movement is the number one in terms of hitting all three of those categories. All right, and so movement obviously is important in terms of circulation, and so keeping yourself moving, keeping your heart healthy, keeping a healthy blood pressure, keeping healthy blood vessels, all of those sort of things is going to be really important in terms of maintaining your circulation throughout your body, but also your circulation to your brain, which is a really tightly regulated thing. Your body does try and prioritize your brain as much as it can. However, if you do have diseases of circulation, or even a loss of function in circulation, it might be what we as chiropractors would call a dis-ease as opposed to a disease. And a dis-ease is kind of what happens to your body before it becomes a disease, and then that's the best time to deal with it. In fact, the best time to deal with it is before it even becomes a dis-ease. But that's another conversation altogether. All right. But really, movement is important for increasing your circulation. It is important for creating new and strengthening old neural pathways. So I think often we do talk about brain training, and we think of things like jigsaw puzzles or Sudokus, and all those sort of things we can do to stimulate and train our brain. And sometimes what we miss is the fact that if we're actually doing really good movement, a really good variety of movement, where we're incorporating and learning new skills, then we can actually be covering both bases at once. We can actually be essentially doing brain training at the same time as we're doing movement that's going to help and stimulate our brain as well. So constantly varied movement. That is actually one of the themes of CrossFit, which you may know that I like to do. But obviously you don't need to do CrossFit to do constantly varied movement. I mean, I like just thinking in my head of even just going for a bushwalk, where everything's constantly changing. You're having to think about where you place your feet and how you step and those sort of things. That is a form of brain training, and it's also providing stimulation to your brain. All right, so you may have seen in the promo for this a quote by Roger Sperry, who's a Nobel Prize winning neurologist, and he says that the spine is like the windmill that generates the power for your brain. Right, and the reason he says that is that when your body moves, it actually sends messages back to your brain. It sends lots of messages back to your brain, but in particular, one type of messages which are called proprioception. They're all about where your body is in space. Okay, so obviously, they're really important if you are doing some physical activity, that you know where your body is in space, in terms of decreasing the risk of injury, in terms of maintaining good posture, as I sit up straighter and remind myself to have good posture whilst I'm talking to you about this. And I'll talk about posture in a second, because that is important too. but these messages are really important in terms of the function of your body. But also, when those messages do hit your brain, they actually cause the release of dopamine and serotonin. They help to de-stress your brain with these really nice feel-good chemicals. Okay, and so that's the stress response you would know intricately linked to the inflammatory response. And so if we can stimulate our brain with this great proprioceptive messaging, then it's going to help de-stress our brain and potentially help to decrease the inflammation in our brain at the same time, which would be a wonderful thing. And so, once again, I'm a chiropractor, right? And so 80% of that feedback, that proprioceptive messaging that goes to your brain, 80% of that actually comes from the spine. So what that means is, yes, you want to make sure you're moving your spine, but also you want to make sure that your spine can move, that your spine is moving and functioning well. And so that's obviously one of the big things that we check as chiropractors, to make sure your spine is moving and functioning well. And so if you're concerned about your brain function, if you're wanting to stimulate your brain and get a bit more out of it, if you're wanting just to, not necessarily on the disease or the dis-ease end of the spectrum, if you're just wanting to perform well, function well, be cognizant, then getting your spine and your nervous system checked by a chiropractor is a really good idea. I certainly found that when I was going through my studies, that was of benefit to me. And so it is about, a variety of exercise as well. It's interesting doing the research for this presentation. And a lot of what gets talked about in the sort of, I guess, the medical sphere is to kind of say, well, you just need to move. It doesn't matter what kind of movement you do, you just need to keep moving. And certainly, I think that's reflected in terms of what we see from those blue zones, societies like Ikaria, Okinawa, where they are. They live active, healthy lifestyles. Ikaria, an island, they're going up and down hills, they're farming, they're carrying produce, all of those sort of things. They are keeping that movement. And a lot of that is those activities of daily living. And so we sort of get the idea, and once again, it's often propagated in the medical sphere that it doesn't matter what you do as long as you're moving. A light walk is going to be good enough, right? But actually, if you look more closely into the research, what you will see is that, yes, there's benefits to that kind of cardiovascular fitness, but there's also benefits to doing, for example, strength training. Okay, and that lean muscle mass that you get from that strength training has actually been shown to be protective in terms of your brain. Okay, there's benefit, as we just said before, in terms of learning new skills. So adding variety to what you're doing in terms of movement, learning a new sport, playing a new game, just doing something fun, right? So there are added benefits that you can get in terms of your brain function by doing more than that sort of bare minimum of just moving, right? So once again, I think those activities of daily living are important. Try and get as much of that movement into your day as you can, because in our modern society, we are far more sedentary than we should be, and it does cause problems. And at the same time, think about how to get some really good variety into that movement as well. All right. So I'm just having a look here from KD. Moderate exercise, increasing blood flow in general, improving oxygenation, hydration, nutrient provision, helps to maintain the nervous system and the brain function. Yeah, agree with all of that, KD. So there's lots of benefits there in terms of the movement. And as I said, I think if you can make sure there's a good variety of that, then you're going to get even more of those benefits, I feel. Okay. So once again, add in some resistance training, add in some variety is really important. The second point I want to talk about is posture. And I think this is a under-recognized area, and under-recognized both, I think, in terms of people's understanding of what research is out there, but also I think under-recognized in terms of I think there's more research to be done. Okay, so this is kind of in some ways a bit of a new and emerging field. In other ways, obviously as chiropractors we've been talking about this for a long time, and we've understood the benefits to the whole body of having that spine and nervous system functioning well and in good alignment and in good posture. If you are a listener of This Week in Wellness, you will have seen a study that I shared just a few weeks ago, talking about the importance of extension in your upper thoracic spine, maintaining the curvature in your neck in terms of your brain function, and in terms of preventing the decline of your brain function as you age. And so there is some really good information there. In fact, the authors of that particular study said that there was such a close link between that loss of posture and your brain function that they felt that could actually be used as a predictor of later dementia. And so they said there was such a close correlation between that loss of posture and that loss of function in your upper back and your neck, that it could be potentially used as a screening tool for people who are, at risk of dementia later on, right? And so, they did say that they couldn't define whether it was the lack of posture and lack of function that was leading to the dementia, or whether it was the dementia that was leading to the lack of posture and lack of function. My suspicion is that it's probably a little bit of both. But I'm probably biased towards thinking that it's more so to do with that loss of function of the spine and the interference that creates to the nervous system that may well be a really big driver in terms of that. So be mindful of your posture. Once again, if your posture is something that you're concerned about, then send me a message. Let's get you checked by a really good chiropractor. And if you're in my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group, I really should, I do this every week, I really should get the link for that. So I'll just grab that for you now. So that if you're not yet in that group, you can jump in there. But I've got some really good videos in there that will help you with your posture, right? So there's one in there on the posture pole. There's one in there on foam rolling, and the live that I'm going to do next month is going to be all about how to maintain a healthy posture. So it's going to be all about the exercises you can do to maintain a healthy posture. So I'm just trying to scroll down here. There we go. So I'll copy that link. So in the comments there will be the link to my Healthy Lifestyle Choices group. I know that if you are listening to the recording, sometimes it's not easy to see those comments and they don't necessarily come up at the right time. So if you just head to my Dr. Brett Hill page, you'll be able to click on the link there for my link tree, and you'll see a link there for joining that Healthy Lifestyle Choices group. Or if you just if you just search in Facebook Healthy Lifestyle Choices, you'll see one that comes up with my image in it, and you'll know that's the one to join. Okay, so anyway, so there's lots of good resources in there where we're talking about posture, and there's certainly more to come as well. All right, so point 3 in terms of looking after your brain is certainly some of that brain training stuff that we spoke about. All right, and there's so many different ways you can do this. Obviously, the more conventional ways are things like crosswords, jigsaws, Sudokus, playing chess is an absolute favourite in my house at the moment. Unfortunately, my son has gotten good at it and beats me now, which is a minor source of frustration, but is also, I think, adding extra challenge to me in terms of stimulating my brain and making me want to work harder to get better. So it's a good little nudge to keep working on my brain function and to keep thinking more accurately, so that I can try and at least stay in front of him for a little bit longer. But I think I'm fighting an uphill battle there. All right, and so there are lots of ways you can do that. Once again, you can incorporate a lot of this into your activities of daily living if you're adding lots of variety to your activities of daily living. So if you're learning new things, so I'm skipping ahead a bit here actually, but my point, what is it? Point 5 is actually learning something new. So I'm going to skip to that because, anytime you're learning something new, you're actually helping to really train and to stimulate your brain. And so that could be exercise, it could be movement, it could be learning a new language, it could be learning a new musical instrument, it could be learning a new skill, whether that be, that might be in the kitchen, that might be in the garden, that might be, whatever it is that you love to do, really. You might be dancing, which has been shown to be really beneficial as well. All right, so all of these things, all of these new skills that you can learn, anytime you're learning a new skill, that can actually be brain training, and that can really help to stimulate your brain. Okay, and of course, coming back to point 4, because I like to jump around a little bit. Coming back to point 4, of course, there are now lots of brain training apps. And so I'm not going to share any in particular here with you because I did look into it and thought about trying to recommend a couple of them. But to be honest, there was such a plethora of them and varying reviews for all of them that I thought, I'm just going to let you guys go and find them. Typically what I will do for something like this is I will just go into the app store in my phone, because usually I'll do these on my phone, and I'll kind of look for the top 3 rated ones, that the users have said are really good. And it can just be a free one. It doesn't have to be a paid one. So often I'll just look for the top 3 free ones and try them. Just try each of them and see which one I like and which one works for me. and then just keep that one and work with it. So I would certainly suggest, it's funny, we tend to think of, social media and gadgets and phones and computers as being brain destroying, and they certainly can be, when they're used poorly, when they're used in an unhealthy way, when they're used excessively, then they certainly can be. However, like most things, when they're used well, they can be really beneficial too. All right, so don't just think that it has to be the old school sort of low tech way of doing it. There are really some nice ways that you can actually use your technology to your advantage. And you might want to set, nowadays you can set timers on that, so you don't end up scrolling and getting lost and sidetracked doing other stuff. So there's lots of other ways that you can do that. Yeah, and as KD is saying, some video games. So once again, I'm sort of, video games can be good and bad as well. I don't want to sort of bag video games because there can be some real benefits there. And it's just important to remember that, often those video games are designed to be addictive and to sort of trap you in and to get you caught there. And so, there are some great games that are really educational, that are really beneficial for you. And there are other games that can just be absolute time saps. That can take you away from doing all of these other beneficial things that we're talking about, right? So just be mindful of that when it comes to things like video games. You just need to get the balance right, and sometimes they can be just really useful, de-stressing tools as well. Just to, have you a little bit of quiet time and play a bit of a video game or whatever, watch some Netflix, whatever it may be, just to sort of de-stress and take your mind off it as well. And that's really important for your brain too, to have, time when it's on and time when it's off. But once again, you just got to be mindful that you're getting the ratios right. And because of the way that many of these games are designed, that can be hard. I mean, they literally have people sitting there figuring out how to get you hooked. And that's part of the process of creating the game. So just be mindful of that, but absolutely right. They can be really beneficial too. So, all right. So we said learning something new. An interesting one that's been talked about a lot more just recently, and I think some of this has definitely come from those blue zones, is the benefits of socializing. And so I know that one of the real sort of common benefits, and perhaps the most common benefit across all of the blue zones in the world, because they all have obviously slightly different lifestyles, but probably the most common is that they are all very social. And so being mindful of the way that you socialize and making sure that you are socializing is really stimulating for your brain. I mean, we are by nature tribal creatures. We are designed to be in a tribe and in a group. And that attention that we get, that stimulation that we get, the memory that we need in order to be able to keep doing that and hold those conversations and interact with those people is actually really beneficial for your brain. Okay, I would anticipate that there's probably a real de-stressing element to that for your brain as well. Once again, reminding that stress response is really closely linked to the inflammatory response, which, as we said, is really important in terms of looking after your brain. All right, so make sure you're socializing. The good news is, from the research that I saw, that there was a real emphasis there that quality over quantity is good. And so for those of you who are more introverted, and you don't have to have 1,000 people, you might just have one or two really good friends that you like catching up with, or you might have a skill or a pastime that you do together with those people, which makes it often easier for those introverted people. So I know for me, I am quite introverted by nature, but every Wednesday night I play indoor cricket with my mates, and we certainly have a catch up, and that's a really good way to, be doing something whilst having a bit of socialising and catching up time at the same time. And we often hang around a bit after the game, sometimes a little bit too late, as it was last night. And so, if I'm breaking some of my own rules, I'll talk about sleep later on. And that probably hasn't been, I didn't get enough last night. So if I'm seeming a bit off, that's probably why I've been a bit naughty, breaking my own rules. But rules are meant to be broken, and sometimes it's good to socialise and have that little bit of extra time, so long as you balance it out later and catch up on that rest and don't burn the candle at both ends all the time, basically, is what I'm saying. But anyway, so socializing is actually really, once again, that's an underrated one, and that's a really important one in terms of maintaining your brain function. And I think probably, if you have someone in your life, and I'd be curious to hear your answers to this, but I think probably if you have someone in your life who has been challenged in terms of their brain function, perhaps they do have dementia, perhaps they do have, are heading down that path or even a long way down that path. I'd be curious to hear whether this sounds familiar, whether this makes sense in terms of, the things we've spoken about in movement and posture and brain stimulation and socializing. Have a think about those people in your life, and it may even be yourself. How well are you doing at these things, and does that make sense to you? Or how well are they doing at these things, and does that make sense to you? So that's socializing. The next one is meditation. Once again, a really useful tool in terms of both stimulating but also de-stressing your brain. It's actually kind of doing both of those at once, which is fascinating. Stimulating some areas and de-stressing other areas. And once again, meditation is one that there's a million different ways that you can do it. And so I have always been someone who has struggled to meditate, struggled to find the right way that works for me. And so, I have certainly, over the time found that sometimes my meditative practices would be things that were a bit more physically active. So, perhaps going for a long run, or perhaps going fishing and just that repetitive, cast and retrieve a fishing line, or things like that were quite useful and quite meditative for me. And once again, in light of what we spoke about earlier in terms of using your gadgets for good instead of evil, I have certainly found more recently that listening to some meditative audio as I'm heading off to sleep has been really beneficial for me in terms of getting to sleep, which has sort of always throughout my life been a on and off problem for me, and exacerbated at times when I've got a lot going on, and obviously exacerbated at times when we have small children in the house, which can tend to disrupt the sleep patterns a little bit as well. And so I have found more recently, I've been using an app called Insight Timer, and that's been quite useful in terms of, for me, just having something to listen to, a bit of a guided meditation, although I find that I don't necessarily stick with the guided part of it, but I do find the voice and the music very relaxing and helping me switch off and go to sleep. So meditation can be a really useful tool that can really, has shown to have wonderful benefits in terms of brain function and cognition and decline of brain function. So that's certainly one to keep an eye on. Okay. And then we can move on to diet. And there are so many different things we can talk about in diet. All right. So I'm going to go through some of them that have sort of been shown to be the kind of superheroes in terms of the research. Once again, this is just what we know so far. There's probably a lot more to it. But in terms of your brain function, obviously one of them that's spoken about a lot is omega-3s. And getting those really healthy, obviously, ratios of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids are really important in terms of the anti-inflammatory effect that they can have, which is obviously really important for your brain. And those fats, your brain is predominantly made up of fat. And so having those fats, they're literally the building blocks of your brain. So that's really important that you're making sure you're getting those. So omega-3s, which is, obviously fish, grass-fed meats, free-range eggs, those sort of things, are really beneficial in terms of making sure you're getting lots of your omega-3s and good ratios of those omega-3s as well. Obviously, there are vegan and vegetarian sources of omega-3 in terms of things like flaxseed and things like that. However, in terms of what your brain needs, particularly the EPA and the DHA, they're not really well converted into the type of omega-3s that or the type of fats that you need for your brain and for your brain to function well. So, that seems to be covered off better nowadays. There are some supplements you can get which are formulated from seaweed, which seem to help in that regard. However, I think the research, and once again, there's debate in this, but my view is that I think the research shows that there is benefit to consuming animal products and omega-3s from animal products in terms of your overall brain function and in terms of your overall health. Once again, there are plenty of people out there who will debate that and argue that, and there may well be some on this call, and that's okay, but that's my opinion on that topic. Okay. The other one, particularly from animal products, is B12, and that is really important for your brain. I can remember some years ago listening to Nora Gagaudis talk about this, and she actually showed brains of people who were deficient in vitamin B12, and it was shocking. There were, something like a 20 to 30% decrease in actual, size of the matter of the brain in people who are deficient in vitamin B12, and so. Once again, this is one that, really, if you're wanting to have your diet from whole foods, then animal products are going to be really important. And if you're not having animal products in your diet, then this really is one that you need to be supplementing. You need to have that vitamin B12. I don't think there's really too much argument about that. I think even most of the vegan commentators nowadays will agree with that and say, yeah, look, you really do. If you want to go vegan, that's okay, but you really do need to supplement with that vitamin B12 because that is really important for your brain. Another one that comes up a lot in terms of brain function is coffee and caffeine. And I'm not sold on it, to be perfectly honest. Once again, the research would suggest that caffeine is good for your brain function, at least in the short term. And then the research in the longer term is a little bit more wishy-washy. My suspicion is that caffeine does stimulate your brain in the short term. It does help you have improved cognition in the short term. But my suspicion as well is that over time you acclimate to that, and then that amount of caffeine, you sort of have that spike of energy because caffeine doesn't really create energy; it just causes you to use your energy faster. And I think the same in terms of brain power. I don't think it necessarily creates extra brain power. I think it maybe just causes you to use that brain power faster. And so it may well be that we end up with a bit of a spike and then a bit of a crash. And that over time we sort of get into a cycle where we're then needing that caffeine just to get to back to a baseline level. Once again, that's more a theory than a fact, I would say at this time. I mean, they're all theories, right? There's no such thing really as a fact. It's all the best available theory we've got right now. However, that's my theory on caffeine. Having said that, I do drink caffeine. I have a black tea in front of me right now, and I did have a coffee this morning. And those of you who've sort of listened to me talk before will know that I'm not a particularly good coffee metabolizer, and so that is on my to-do list over the next whatever period of time, I don't know, month, year, several years, is to get back off of coffee. It's a bit of a crutch that I've used as I've had a small child in the house and not been getting as much sleep as I would like to be able to keep doing the things that I want to do. And it certainly, once again, is a short-term benefit in terms of brain function, in terms of being able to operate in practice and do the work that I want to do and do my podcast and do these sort of events for you guys at 7:30 at night when I have had a long day. But I think ultimately my suspicion is that my brain and my body and my health in general would probably be better off without having caffeine. So so KD Butler says coffee so good. Yeah, I know it's always it's always uncomfortable when you start talking to people about giving up their coffee because it definitely is one that people find and they struggle to do. But you know what? Generally, what I would say to people is, if coffee is your vice, it's one of the better ones. Like I said, the research really isn't conclusive about whether it's good or bad. I wouldn't be that wouldn't be the first thing I'd try and change, and hence it's not for me. It's not something that I'm desperately wanting to change right now. But it is something that I would, probably anticipate to change in the future. Decaf, KD, it depends what sort of decaf. Much of the decaf is really highly processed in order to make it decaf, and it's not necessarily very good for you as a result. And so be really careful with the decaf. There is one way of doing it. I think it's called Swiss filtered decaf. I know Macola. You may or may not know, he's a bit controversial nowadays, but Macola back in the day used to talk a lot about that, and that was a way of doing it without the sort of heat and the chemicals that sort of would cause problems, and allow you to have decaf without it necessarily being such an issue. Anyway, that's coffee. Blueberries are very widely recognised as being really good for your brains, both as a result of their sort of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties that they have. And so those are really good. Obviously, they're a bit sort of lower carb than a lot of other fruits and vegetables as well. And so you really get good bang for your buck in terms of nutrient benefit. And so I think, in terms of your brain, generally, fats are the what you want to move towards. And too much sugar and carbohydrate is probably what you want to move away from in terms of that inflammation that they can cause in your brain. But once again, I'm certainly not saying don't have any fruit. I'm not promoting sort of a carnivore diet. I'm just saying just be mindful. And something like, if you are going to have fruit, then something like blueberries is certainly a great one to go for, because that's really good and healthy for your brain. Turmeric is another that's been getting a lot of attention lately, and that's a great herb, I don't know, root that you can use. Is turmeric a herb? I don't even know. It's anyway, whatever it is. It's great. It's anti-inflammatory, and that's probably the biggest benefit it has in terms of the brain and also in terms of the whole body. And it's also been shown to be neurosupportive. So more specifically in terms of the nervous system and the brain, there is research showing that turmeric really does support the brain and the nervous system. So that's a great one to add in, and you can add that into your coffee or your tea or whatever you're having, or that can be added in all sorts of different places, and just be careful that you don't stain everything you've got when you're doing it, but it's a great one. Dark leafy greens, vegetables, are another that is fantastic for your brain. And so vitamin K, as you would know, is an essential nutrient for your brain. That's why they often want you to supplement that when a baby is first born, which is the whole nother discussion altogether. But if you want to do that in a more natural way, then dark greens are a great way to get that. So dark leafy greens, your spinach, your broccoli, your bok choys, all those sort of things, they are, once again, anti-inflammatory. They do have lots of antioxidants in them, and they're a great source of that vitamin K as well. All right. Dark chocolate is another one that often gets great praise in terms of the brain. And once again, my suspicion is that the dark chocolate is perhaps a little bit like the coffee, in that the caffeine probably does have a short-term benefit. I tend to think that if you're having sort of like proper chocolate, proper dark chocolate that is made with healthy fats, and doesn't have bucket loads of sugar in it. If you look on your chocolate and your first ingredient is sugar, then you probably want to put it back, especially in terms of your brain health. But if you're having like really nice, good quality dark chocolate that is full of healthy fats, then those healthy fats are going to help to mitigate the effects of the caffeine and slow down the effects of the caffeine. It does also have lots of flavonoids in it. It has antioxidants in it. And once again, it has healthy fats in it, which are good for your brain. So once again, I would think in terms of brain health, dark chocolate would be one that I'd be much more inclined to leave in. So I'm sure that'll help me curry back some favours. And I think once again, the best one is probably one you make at home, with just your cacao and your cacao butter and maybe just a little bit of honey in there. And that's going to be really, I think, healthy and pretty supportive for your brain. So dark chocolate, I think, is good. Keep that one in. Nuts, once again, obviously really great sources of healthy fats, antioxidants, and also vitamin E, which has been shown to be important for brain functions. So once again, certainly keeping up the nuts is a great way to be looking after. Walnuts, obviously famously good for your brain and kind of look like a brain, which is, very social media friendly, gets shared a lot, and everyone seems to love that one. So definitely get the nuts in. Oranges. So vitamin C has also been shown to be really beneficial for the nervous system and the brain. Once again, I think primarily due to its role as sort of an antioxidant as well. So once again, certainly not saying avoid all fruit, but I do think in terms of your brain health, you want to get that balance right between sugars and fats and carbohydrates. Sorry, proteins and fats and carbohydrates. And err towards the fat side rather than the sugar side is a good idea in terms of brain function and protecting and looking after your brain. All right. And so on that note, eggs are fantastic for the brain. Right. Once again, healthy fats, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, folate, which as we know is really important for the nervous system, and particularly the development of the nervous system, and choline, which is an important precursor in terms of all your amino acids and your proteins. So choline's a really important one in terms of your brain health as well. All right, and so all of those things come from eggs. So eggs are definitely once again, you listen to the research on eggs, you come out so confused because 1 week it's good, 1 week it's bad, 1 week it's good, 1 week it's bad. But I think it makes sense that eggs are good for us. That we would have, from an evolutionary basis, consumed eggs. They would have been a really important part of us developing our big brains and becoming the humans that we are. And so I think it makes sense that that the healthy fats that you're getting from eggs are going to be beneficial for both your body and your brain. So I would definitely be keeping those in. Green tea, once again, a bit like the coffee. There may be some short-term, some long-term debate around that. But once again, I think with the green tea, depending on the green tea, most green teas do have less caffeine than coffee. So it's a bit of a gentler way to sort of stimulate your brain, perhaps a slightly healthier way. But there are also, a slew of other things in green tea that do seem to be beneficial for the brain. So if you're wanting to have a tea for your brain, you may well be better off. Well, it may well be that there are herbal teas that are even better again, and they might have ginseng and things like that that are somewhat supportive to the brain and the nervous system. But certainly green tea, I would think on the scale of things is probably going to be more supportive, for example, than coffee, because it does have a sort of lesser caffeine, but also things like L-theanine, which are really supportive for the brain and for the nervous system as well. So Katie Butler says, tempted to try some green tea, to be honest. Yeah, I think green tea is great. I think green tea is definitely a healthier option. Well, I can't say definitely. I think it's a healthier option. Once again, I also think the research is probably, we can't definitively say, I don't think, on that. And once again, I feel like if coffee is your vice, then it's probably one of the better ones, especially in terms of brain function. I don't think there's a lot of conclusive research to say that might be bad, but I suspect on the overall balance that it might be, if that makes sense. And I'll keep going back over that topic, but hopefully that makes sense. And then avocados are another great food for your brains. Just those really healthy fats that are just really beneficial. Once again, providing those building blocks for your brain, helping make a really important part of an anti-inflammatory diet that's going to be overall good for your brain. Okay. So that's foods. There's a lot in that, and hopefully that all makes sense. I feel like it's a lot of stuff that you probably sort of sit back and go, yeah, I would have guessed that, or I already knew that. But it's good to have that nice little reminder in terms of what's important, I think, for your brain. The next one is sleep. Okay, and so we do need to make sure we're getting enough rest and we're getting enough sleep. We need to give our brains a chance to recover and to heal, in order to help to bring that inflammation down, in order to maintain that sort of healthy circulation. The other one that actually I don't have there is hydration, which is really important in terms of that circulation too. So that actually should have been on my list and wasn't. But anyway, let's add that in. Hydration is a really important one too. But anyway, sleep, I think that just goes without saying. And so it may well be, I think in the near future, I might do a workshop on healthy sleep habits, because I think that's an important one that we could talk about that would be really beneficial for most people, and probably would be a good reminder for me to tidy up some of those healthy sleep habits as well. But making sure you're getting enough sleep. Once again, there's a variety out there in terms of the research is how much sleep is enough sleep. It seems to be the consensus is sort of 6 to 8 hours, and that depends on you. And I suspect sometimes that sort of consensus might be based on what's the bare minimum to survive rather than what helps you function at your best. And so my suspicion is that you want to be pushing more towards the 8 hours than the 6 hours, if that makes sense. We're almost there. The last couple, I'm doing all right here. I'm keeping to the hour, which is good. Chronic diseases can risk your brain function, all right? And so things like hypertension, diabetes, obesity, depression, head trauma, and high cholesterol have all been shown to be linked to brain function. I would say particularly the last one, the high cholesterol. I think there's some debate around that. Once again, I'd like to see more research on that before I was convinced that high cholesterol is necessarily bad for your brain. But I've included it in because it does sort of exist there in the research as well. But I think all of these things are just a good reminder that really, your brain can be really just a reflector, I think, of your overall health. And that if we get sort of lost in the minutiae of, what nutrient, what hack, what, biohack can we do to sort of stimulate our brain, and, what nootropics can we take that are going to stimulate our brain. And, you'll notice that I've kind of deliberately avoided or haven't included things like nootropics and biohacks in here because I think for the most part, they're sort of short-term fixes. They're sort of patches, and I think for the most part, you're better off having a well-rounded, healthy diet which will include the nutrients that your brain needs and will provide your brain with everything it needs. Because at the end of the day, it's not possible for your brain to have evolved requiring nutrients that you couldn't get through foods, because that's how your brain evolved. And so it wouldn't have been a very intelligent survival mechanism for your brain to require nutrients that you couldn't get through your food. And so I think getting your diet right, because of the impact it has on your brain, but because when you do get that diet right, you've got that more holistic effect on your body in terms of your overall health, in terms of these chronic diseases that we're talking about. I think that's more likely in the long run to get you the best benefit in terms of your brain function. All right. So being mindful of your entire well-being, your diet, your lifestyle, your exercise, because really most of these chronic diseases are very much lifestyle related. So being mindful of that is really important. And then the final thing is smoking. So once again, apologies to the smokers, because I know you get bashed around the head enough, and rightly so, because smoking is terrible for you. If you're a smoker, cut back or ideally quit. The research tends to suggest you're better off just quitting, and that's actually more successful than trying to cut back or do replacements with patches and all those sort of things, despite what the companies that sell cigarettes and vapes and patches will try and tell you. It does seem that just quitting is the best thing to do. And the best way to do that is to be really connected with why you're quitting. And so perhaps this might be the trigger. Perhaps your brain health is important enough to you that you do decide just to quit smoking, which would be fantastic. I did see, once again, researching for my podcast today, that the smoking rate in Australia is now down to 11%, which is the lowest it's been for a long time. So it does seem that it's heading in the right direction, and that's great. All right. So those are my key points for brain function. The other one that we probably could have included in there would be alcohol. Once again, I think that would probably be a little bit like coffee, in that there may well be some debate around that in terms of brain function, particularly in terms of circulation. But I think my take on that would be, I think that the alcohol would be, on the whole, a negative rather than a positive influence on your brain function. And so minimizing or quitting that as you choose would probably be a benefit if you're really wanting to dial in and focus on your brain function. So once again, I didn't actually have that in my notes. That's a little bit of an oversight, so I'm glad that sort of popped into my head as I was coming along. But that would certainly be one, especially in excess, that would be having a negative impact on your brain function. And then once again, that sort of thing of like 1 glass of red wine a day does have the resveratrol, does have those antioxidants. Once again, look at some of those blue zones around the world, and they do that, although some of them do water it down as well, so it's even less alcohol. There may well be some benefits there in terms of your brain. However, once again, my suspicion is that overall it's probably a negative contributor rather than a positive contributor to a healthy aging brain. All right. So that's everything I wanted to go over tonight in terms of my brain health workshop. I hope that all makes sense to you. If you do have any questions, by all means, let me know now before we head off. If that was beneficial to you, then by all means, let me know. I'm just going to add